Hey guys, welcome back to Maker's Gonna Learn. My name's Alicia, and today I'm gonna be showing you all how to make this beautiful stovetop cover. You're gonna be able to complete this project using minimal power tools, and honestly, if you just had a screwdriver, you'd be able to do the entire thing. We're also gonna show you a really cool stenciling hack that you guys cannot miss. Okay, so the supplies that you're gonna need for this project are any chalk paint of your choice. We're gonna use this smoky gray color. You can also do a stain if you want, any color. I like chalk paint just because it dries faster, it looks nicer, you don't have to do as much sanding. It's just a good choice overall. And then I'm gonna use white for our letters. And then I've got a little paper plate just for our paint. And I'm gonna use, this is like a edging brush. I'm gonna use this to do most of the board painting. And then I'm gonna use the smaller brushes just to do the words. And I'll show you how we use those whenever we get to that. I've got felt dots. These are gonna go on the bottom of the noodle board. That way it doesn't scratch up your stove. Set of gloves. I've got 2 handles, a sanding block, and I think this is probably like an 80 grit sanding block if I had to guess. Really any sanding block will do, just something that's going to get your edges nice and smooth. And then I've got a bottle of wood glue. We've got a drill. This is our vinyl decal, and you can do the design that we're gonna do, or you can select your own. And then we also have our wood pieces. Okay, so this is the wood that we actually are gonna use for our project. This is a piece of plywood. We got a 4x4 piece of wood, and we had to cut it down to size in Home Depot. So you can actually take your measurements from your stove and bring them into Home Depot, and they'll cut the wood down to size for you. So make sure whatever stove you're gonna be putting your wood on that you're measuring before you go to the store. So this one is 19 by 30. That was our measurements for the main part. And that's gonna be from edge to edge basically. And then we had these pine boards cut down to, these are 1x4s, and they're cut down to 19 inches. And you're gonna need 2 of those, and they're gonna go on each side. So it's gonna be something like this. So if you want a price breakdown, the plywood that we bought, the 4x4, was $24. And we actually got 2 of those and had some wood left over. And then these 2 pieces came from a 1x4x8, and it was $8. So all in all, the project cost about $16 just for the wood. So you're basically gonna be able to get 2 of these boards at $16 each. Okay, so the first thing you're gonna do when you get your boards on your table is we're gonna take our little sanding block, and we're gonna go around our edges and make sure that if there's any little like frayed edges, we wanna sand all of that off. That way it looks nice and finished whenever we actually go to paint it. So I'm just gonna sand all of these edges like this. And you may need to do more, you may need to do less. It just depends on how rough your cut is. And then these are pretty smooth, but you can go ahead and sand the tops of them just to make sure that there's no rough edges sticking up. And I also like to kind of go along these edges that way that they're a little bit rounded and not so like harsh. It's gonna, depending on the look that you want, the more you sand it, the more rustic it's gonna look. If you like a clean edge, it's gonna look more modern. So that's totally your discretion. Just make sure that there's no little pieces sticking up. And then you're also gonna be sanding your big board. So you're just gonna do the same thing. You're gonna go all the way around the edges, and you can sand the surface of this in circular motions. And just sand it until it's as smooth as a baby's bottom. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna do is paint our board. I did choose a gray for our color. This is a chalk paint. It's Americana Decor. It's a deco art brand. So we're gonna use that. You can use any color. You can do a stain if you want to. We're just gonna do a chalk paint. Chalk paint dries really fast, and it's easy to work with. So that's what we're gonna do for now. And I'm gonna start by painting the base. And actually, I think I like the other side better. So you can pick whatever side that you want. I'm probably gonna end up painting both sides, but I'm gonna start with my favorite side because I want to. So we're gonna open this up. I'll sit that over there. And then I'm just gonna use one of these brushes. You can pour out some paint onto a plate if you want to, but this brush fits in there. So I'm gonna go ahead and just paint like that. So the reason that we chose to paint this stovetop cover is because we're using like a cheaper plywood, and then we have the pine boards, and I really wanted to make it look cohesive. If you use a stain, you may not get the exact same color. So like if I stain this pine board with a dark wood stain, and then I use that same exact stain and I paint the plywood, it's not necessarily gonna look the same. The wood, different types of wood have different consistencies and they absorb the stain differently. So just know that, like if you do decide to stain, you might wanna spend the little extra bit of money to get the same type of wood. So like if you're gonna use pine for your edges, you're gonna wanna have a pine backer, or whatever wood you decide to go with. Just make sure it's the same type of wood whenever you stain. Otherwise, it may look a little bit different. Now, if you want that kind of look, that's okay too. It's gonna look more rustic, I guess, if you do that. But just know if you want it to look exactly the same, it's not going to unless you have the same wood. So I'm painting the tops of these wood slats. I'm not painting the bottom part. I am painting the edges, but the bottom, we're not even gonna see it. So you don't even need to do that. If you really wanna be thorough, you can. It's not gonna matter. It's not gonna affect it at all. But I'm just gonna skip that part because nobody's gonna see it. It's okay. While this is drying, we're gonna go ahead and hop on over to Design Space and design the stencil for our stovetop cover. To make this super easy, we have this little link right here in our fonts category. It's called grids. So you're just gonna click on that and it's gonna pull up this page. So there are many different options right here. Basically, this just sets you up for success. So you can select any of these and you're able to plug in your fonts once you get into Design Space. So I'm gonna click on this one. This is my favorite one. It's super cute, kind of vintage. And then right here and right here is where we're gonna plug in our last name and our established date. So it kind of guides you on where your wording is gonna look the best. You can choose whatever fonts that you want, but down here, they have selected fonts that would look good in there. These are fonts that are on the Makers Gonna Learn website if you are a member. We do offer memberships that include lots of fonts, lots of really cute cut files. We have courses, members only videos. There's a private Facebook group that everybody loves. It's super fun, a really good community. So if you're interested in that, you can click the links below. Otherwise, we're gonna go ahead and download this and pull it into Design Space. Once you've downloaded your grid, you're gonna pull it over into Design Space. You can upload it right here. Just click the upload and you'll hit browse and you'll find your file. You're gonna select the SVG. So right here is our SVG. We have our big red blocks. That's gonna show us where our text goes. So what I'm gonna do is go ahead and add our text in. So we're gonna go with Crawford. And the font that I chose is Vintage Jeans. We have many different fonts that you can choose from. I wanted to do something vintage because I feel like this is a very like old school logo and it just kind of fits. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull that down here, and it's super small. So you can either change the font size here or change the width up here. Either way is gonna be fine. Or you can just click and drag until it looks good. So I'm gonna pull that, and I like mine to be like as big as possible, but it's gonna depend on your style and what you think looks good. And then I'm gonna select all this and go to align and center it. And then I'm gonna go over to the text box again, and we're gonna put EST period 2022. And I've still got it on the Vintage Jeans font. That's gonna tie in our last name. Oops, gonna undo that. We're gonna use the Vintage Jeans font. That's gonna tie everything together to look cohesive. And then I'm just gonna select everything, just click and drag, select everything. And you're gonna go to align, center horizontally, and everything is lined up now. So the next thing that we need to do is get rid of our red boxes. So I'm gonna click off of that, and then we're gonna come over here to the family name grid, and I'm gonna go ahead and select that, and we're just gonna delete them because we don't need them for anything. And now that they're gone, I feel like we should move this up just a couple notches to make it look better. And then I'm gonna click off of it, and I'm also gonna move this one down a couple notches. So you can kind of play around with it and make it look how you want, but those red boxes are gonna be a really good guideline for you. Now that our design is complete, we're gonna go ahead and click and drag and select everything, and you're gonna go to the bottom right-hand corner and you're gonna select weld. The reason we do that is so that when we go to cut it, all of this is gonna cut on one sheet of vinyl. It's not gonna split itself up. So if we didn't weld everything together, Crawford and Established would probably be on a separate mat. This is gonna allow us to keep our design intact, and everything's gonna be cut together. And then one more thing that we wanna do before we cut our design is shrink this down. So our mats are 12 by 12. I'm gonna go ahead and make this 10.5. That way we have a little bit of wiggle room on the edges. So my width is 10.5, and this is gonna adjust proportionally. So I'm gonna go ahead and click tab, and then that is the size that we need. So after that's done, after you resize, you're gonna go to the top right corner, and you're gonna make sure that your correct Cricut maker is selected. So we're using a Maker 3, so we are right where we need to be. And then we're gonna select Make It, and it's gonna pull up a screen, and right here we're gonna select On Mat and click Done. Over here, we wanna make sure that we've got the right material size. We are using a 12 by 12 sheet of vinyl on a 12 by 12 mat. And then we don't need to mirror it, just ignore that. But we wanna make sure this is all fitting on here and that we're not cutting on multiple mats. We want it all to be on one. Because we're making this into a stencil, another good tip is to move your design into the middle of the mat. That way you're gonna have a little bit of wiggle room all the way around your design. That's gonna help you whenever you're applying the paint onto the board over top of the stencil. So after that, you're gonna go down here and you're gonna select Continue. And then we're gonna make sure that our machine is connected, and we're gonna select our Maker 3 USB connection. And then we're going to browse on materials, and you can come up here and search which material that we're gonna be using. We're actually using permanent vinyl for this. You can use stencil vinyl if you want, but we had permanent vinyl on hand, so that's what we're gonna use. So I'm just gonna type in vinyl. And usually if you're using the same product over and over again, you can save it to your favorites and it's right there for you to grab. But I just wanted to show you guys in case you didn't know how to find it. So we're gonna go ahead and select Premium Vinyl Permanent Glossy, and then we're gonna hit Done. We already have our vinyl cut out, so you'll just need to continue following these prompts to go ahead and cut your stencil on your Cricut. The next thing we're gonna do is apply our handles. These were actually found in the gate section, so they are gate pulls. And the reason we did this is because if you buy a cabinet pull, you're gonna have to screw them in from the back side. This is gonna allow a lot easier application. It just comes with the 2 screws. If you just have a screwdriver, you can use a screwdriver to apply these, or you can use a drill, whatever you're more comfortable with. We just wanted to make the project as easy as possible, especially if you don't have a lot of power tools on hand. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna measure our skinny pieces of wood and make sure that our handles are centered on each side. I forgot to mention it in the beginning, but a tape measure would be really good for you to have. That way that you can measure these wood pieces and center your hardware on correctly. So we're gonna go ahead and I'm gonna measure our handle first. So I'm just gonna go from this end to this end, and it's about 5 inches. So halfway would be about 2.5. And then I'm gonna measure this, which is 19 inches. And halfway of 19 is 9.5. And I'm just gonna put a little teeny dot there. If you wanna paint over that afterwards, you can. If you wanna use a pencil, it'll erase right off of the wood. So after you've marked your 9.5, we're gonna go 2.5 to the left and 2.5 to the right. So you're gonna mark both of those spots. That way when we put our handle on, it's gonna line up perfectly. So I've got half, 1 inch, and 2 inch. I'm gonna go ahead and put a mark there. And then just make sure they're big enough so that you can see them yourself. And then there's a 1/2 inch, 1 inch, and 2 inches. So that's gonna be 2.5 inches from 9.5. The next thing you're gonna do is line up your handle. So I have 1 dot here and 1 dot here. I'm just gonna line that up centrally. And you can also measure across the width. And we've got this about 3.5 inches wide. So halfway of that is 1.75 inches. So I'm just gonna scooch our guy over just a little bit so that he's perfectly centered. You can measure this all the way across if you want and make it like perfectly centered. It's totally up to you. I'm more of an eyeballer. That's just who I am. So I feel like this looks really good where it's at. So we're just gonna repeat this step on the other one, and then we're gonna go ahead and screw them in. Now that I have my handles placed where I want them to go, I'm gonna go ahead and put the screws in. You can use a screwdriver for this step, but for the sake of time, I'm gonna go ahead and use the drill. So you're just gonna take your screws, and we're gonna do one side at a time, and just make sure you're holding your screw really steady when you do this. If you're not comfortable, ask for help. And then just make sure that these are lined up straight, and you're gonna go in and do the other side. Make sure you're putting enough pressure behind the drill to actually get it in there. You don't want to strip your screws by just spinning it and not putting any pressure. You're going to start out slow, and then you'll build speed as you go. After I do that one, I'm going to pull this one up and go ahead and put these screws in as well. Sometimes the handle will want to wiggle when you're screwing it in, so if you can use one hand to actually hold it in place, it'll help so it doesn't start spinning while you're actually putting the screw in. And like I said, you're going to start slow, make sure you're applying enough pressure, just start slow and then build speed as you go. The next thing we're going to do is glue our side pieces to the backer. I'm using Gorilla Wood glue. This is my favorite glue to use when I'm gluing wood. We're just going to apply a nice even coat to the back of our individual pieces, and then we're going to attach them. If you have clamps laying around, you can clamp your edges. If you don't have clamps, you can use really heavy books. You can use paint buckets, anything that's going to be heavy and that's going to allow you to put pressure on this. That way it's glued down really, really well. That's going to help you a lot. And if you're feeling really fancy, you can get a brad nailer and you can actually nail these pieces in. So what I'm going to do is take our wood glue, and I'm just going to apply this all the way down, and I'm going to go in a zigzag formation. That way it's really covered. You don't want to get too close to the edges because it may ooze out of the sides. We can wipe it off, but so once you've applied it, you can use your finger to kind of spread the glue out to the edges. This is gonna help with bleeding. Like after you put it onto the wood, we don't want it to ooze out. So I'm just using my finger. If you want to use a paintbrush, you can, but you know, this is like the fun part. So I'm just spreading that around as good as I can, nice and even. And then I'm gonna go ahead and place this on the right side. This is the part where you're gonna go ahead and put books on each end. You can use clamps, or we have a brad nailer, so I'm just gonna go ahead and nail each of these in after I glue them. Okay, so for the next part, you're just gonna repeat the same exact steps. We're gonna apply our glue, and then we're going to use a brush or use your hand, and you can smudge all this glue across the back, and then you're gonna attach it to the end. And then we're gonna go ahead and use our brad nailer and attach it. Now it's time to place our stencil. So this is my stencil that we cut out earlier. I've already applied the transfer tape. All we have to do is measure all the way across so that we get a central point, and then we will apply our stencil vinyl. So now we're gonna measure our board, and this from this inner spot to this inner spot is about 23 inches. That's gonna be 11.5 if we go halfway. So I'm just gonna put a little teeny tiny baby dot right there in the center, and then I'm gonna pull it down. I'm gonna repeat that down here. Let's see, 11.5. And I'm also gonna do it up at the top. That way we've got multiple guides to keep our stencil in the middle. I'm also gonna measure from top to bottom. So this is 19 inches tall. So we're gonna go ahead and do that at 9.5. Just gonna put a little mark there. And all these marks can be painted over, or you can use a pencil and it'll erase. I'm gonna put a mark here. So now we've got guidelines all the way around, and we can put our stencil right in the middle of that, especially since it's a circle. It's gonna make it a lot easier to line up. So I'm gonna go ahead and lay my stencil down face first, and I'm gonna peel off this backing. So just go nice and carefully. When you're dealing with a lot of letters with vinyl, you wanna go very carefully so that the middles of the letters don't peel up with your backer. We don't wanna rip our stencil. So just take your time on this part. And remember, once your stencil is down, it's down. So make sure you're kind of lining up everything, like hovering over before you actually place your stencil. And I like to place it like a taco. So like I like to fold it up and start from the center and then let it lay down to the edges. That way there's no bubbles. So I'm gonna look at this family owned. It's kind of like a central point, and I'm gonna line that up with our top dot. I don't know if you guys can see it up above, but this is our central dot. So this is right down the middle. So I'm gonna line it up there. And then the middle this way is between Crawford and Supply. So I'm gonna go ahead and line that up with these dots right here. Okay, and then you're just gonna take a burnishing tool and you're gonna flatten that out. So after you've used your burnishing tool to flatten out your stencil, we're gonna go ahead and remove our transfer tape. Just find a good edge, and we're gonna peel that up. Just be very careful, same as when we were pulling off the backer. You wanna be super careful that you're not actually gonna pull up any middles of your letters, like the middle of this A, or any like delicate spots like in between that Y. You just wanna be very aware and take your time during this step. Another thing that you can do is use heat transfer vinyl. We wanted to make a stencil so it looks a little bit more, I guess, authentic, but you could use heat transfer vinyl and it's gonna look really good and crisp. So depending on the style of your stove cover, you can do either way, really. And you could probably just use permanent vinyl on this and it would be fine as well. So just keep pulling this all the way off. Okay, so once you've removed your transfer vinyl, we're gonna go ahead and use a little trick that's gonna make these lines super crispy. We're gonna take the base color, so the gray that we used on here, we're gonna take that same exact gray. You're gonna think that I'm lying to you, and I promise that I'm not. Just trust me when I say paint over your stencil with the same exact color. So we're gonna go in just with our gray. I got like a smaller brush for this step. And you're gonna paint right over top of this stencil. It doesn't need to be super neat, but you don't want it to be like lumpy. We want it to be very smooth, just like a good even coat. And you wanna be super careful on these edges right here. You don't want to go outside of the white. It's not going to matter as much when we're putting the gray on because obviously it's the same exact color. But when we do go in with the white, you want to be very careful. So we're just going to apply this. We don't want it to be too thick though. Just make sure you're evening out all of your paint. This is going to seal in the edges of the stencil. So if we just went in willy-nilly and used our white paint, it's going to go underneath your stencil almost every time. If you go ahead in with this base color and then let it dry and then apply the color you want for your words, it's going to look super, super clean. So that's the whole point of us applying this paint here. Now, if you're using stain, like if you stained your board, I recommend that you use a brown paint that's similar to the color of stain that you're using. If you're using a brown stain, if you're using a gray wash stain, you can just use gray paint. Just use something that's really similar to the color of the base. You don't want to go over, if you did a stained board and then you put your stencil on, you don't want to stain on top of your stencil. You just need to use like a really similarly colored brown paint for that. So we're going to let this dry completely before we apply our white paint. So we will be back in just a few minutes and we will apply our final coats. Once your gray has dried, we're going to go ahead and get a clean brush. You can just rinse out the brush you already had or get a brand new one. And we're going to go into our white paint and we're just going to go right over top of this. We're going to do one coat and let it dry, and we'll see if we need a second coat. I have a feeling we're going to need to put a second coat on here, but you're just going to paint right over the stencil. Make sure you're really careful on these edges over here that you don't go over the edge of the stencil this time because we are using white. If you accidentally do, you can just go over it with some gray paint, no big deal. Now that our first coat of white has dried, we're going to go ahead and go in with our second coat of white paint. You're just going to do the same thing. Make sure you're doing a nice even coat. And we want to make sure we get any areas that we might have missed the first time. And then after that, we're going to let it sit to air dry, and then we will remove our stencil. Once you've got your second coat of white on and you let it dry for a few minutes, you can go ahead and peel off your stencil. So I'm going to go ahead and get my paint out of the way. And you can let it dry completely, or you can take it off while it's still a little bit damp. It's not going to matter either way. I just wouldn't hit it with a hair dryer because your stencil may stick to your wood a little bit more. It may stick to the wood anyways and pull up some of the wood grain, and I'll show you guys how to fix it if it does do that. But I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to take a weeding tool and just grab one of these little edges and go ahead and start peeling this stencil off. Don't be alarmed if it pulls off some of your base color paint. We're going to go ahead and repaint the parts that it messes up. And we're also going to be distressing this sign a little bit, so you'll be able to see how we do that as well. A tip that you can do to remove your stencil vinyl is to take out the bigger chunks of the stencil first, and then you can come back in and do the smaller, like insides of these letters. If you remove the big parts first, you're going to be able to identify the smaller insides of the letters a lot easier. So once you've completely weeded your stencil out, we're going to go ahead and flip this over onto the bottom, and we're going to apply our felt pads onto each corner. And like I said earlier, if you want to paint the bottom of this, you can. For time purposes, I just went ahead and painted the top only. So we're going to go ahead and place felt dots on each corner. So they look like this, and they just have a little sticky on the back. You're gonna go ahead and peel off that plastic part. And we're gonna put one on each corner. This is just gonna prevent us from scratching up our stovetop, and it's gonna be a lot nicer looking if we have these on the bottom. So once you have all those on, we can go ahead and flip it back over. And now this is dry, so I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna run my sanding block all along the edges and kind of throughout and give this a really distressed look. I like to focus my sanding along the edges of the board, and you don't want it to be in a pattern. So if I'm sanding on this inner corner over here, I don't necessarily need to come over here and sand that corner as well. We want it to look like it's been sitting in an attic somewhere for 100 years. It's kind of like the vibe we're going for. We want it to look super old. And then you can come on here and sand some spots down too. You can sand over your words a little bit if you want to. Whatever your heart desires. I'm gonna actually go in with an 80 grit. This is a lower number grit than what I was using. So the lower the number of the grit, the rougher your surface is gonna be. This is just gonna make it a little bit more roughed up in certain spots. So you can go in, no rhyme or reason to where I'm going. I just want it to look a little bit more dinged up. And if you don't have a sanding block, that's totally okay. You can use, if you've just got a disc, you can use the disc. It's not a big deal. It's gonna get the same job done. Okay, so after you've distressed it, you're gonna go ahead and take a paper towel and you can just wipe all of that excess dust off of there. And you are pretty much finished. So what did you guys think about this project? I think it turned out really good. And for under $20, we were able to complete a project that almost looks like we bought it from the store. If you're interested in using the files that we used in this, make sure to sign up for our Makers Gonna Learn membership in the links below. Can't wait to see you guys in the next video. Bye.